U.S. prosecutors have widened their criminal case against Sam Bankman-Fried, adding new charges and detailing a series of systems and schemes through which they allege the FTX founder siphoned off billions of dollars from customer deposits. The updated indictment, released Thursday morning, added charges including securities fraud and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. That brought the total number of criminal counts against the former billionaire to 12. Amazon closed its acquisition of healthcare provider One Medical and its parent in a $3.9 billion deal on Wednesday, hours after the Federal Trade Commission said it will not challenge the purchase, but that regulators are still investigating potential competitive and consumer harms of the transaction. The landmark deal will turn the e-commerce giant into a provider of primary medical care with access to more than 200 brick-and-mortar doctors' offices, along with roughly 815,000 One Medical members. Google is blocking some Canadians' access to news, it confirmed yesterday, as part of a test in response to a law in the works that would require digital giants to pay for local journalism content. The restricted access to news sites started earlier in the month and will run for 5 weeks, affecting 4% of Canadian users of its popular search engine. Netflix is slashing prices of its subscription plans in some countries as it looks to maintain subscriber growth amid stiff competition and strained consumer spending. The stock fell nearly 5%, underperforming the broader market and on course for its worst day in more than 2 months. The past year has seen intense competition in the streaming industry as a pandemic-driven boom fades and consumers curtail spending over fears of a possible recession. For more on these headlines, we'll cross over to London, where we're joined by Arise business analyst Bode Oshosumi. Good morning, Bode. Thanks for joining us. What else do we know about the nomination of the new World Bank boss from the United States?
Good morning. Well, indeed, the bank has historically been headed by someone from the United States. That's the World Bank. That's also the largest shareholder, while a European traditionally heads the IMF. But developing countries and emerging markets have been pushing to widen these choices, and perhaps that is why the choice of Banga being an Indian American in a way dots all the I's and crosses the T's, especially in satisfying the stakeholders. Banga's nomination is the first to be made public, but the bank will also accept other nominations from other member countries through the process goes until the end of March. Germany, that's another major shareholder, this week said that the job should go to a woman, since the bank had never been headed by a woman before. But G20 finance ministers will be discussing the World Bank's future at a meeting in Bengaluru on Friday, and nominations that I believe that's today will close by March 29 ahead of a May start date for the new president. Banga is currently vice chair of General Atlantic, that's a U.S. private equity group, and was the chief executive of payments company Mastercard until the end of 2020. The nomination came only after a week after sitting President David Malpass suddenly resigned. Malpass's exit is suspected to be related to activists' outrage after he said he was not a scientist when asked for views related to climate change. And of course, others suspect his lack of enthusiasm on climate issues is certainly unhelpful as the US and other shareholder nations seek to expand the bank's development agenda to incorporate more on the fight against global warming. Biden said Banga has a very strong grasp of the challenges facing developing economies and critical experience in mobilizing private money to tackle the most urgent challenges, including climate change. And he's seen as an advocate of global financial inclusion and was among dozens of chief executives who called on governments in an open letter to do more to cut emissions ahead of the COP26 climate summit. Others say his work in India and other emerging markets and his obsession with really expanding financial inclusion, as well as a very deep knowledge of new technologies, would help bridge the divide between the richer countries and emerging markets. Kamala Harris also said Banga brings great insight, energy and persistence to his role as co-chair of the Partnership for Central America, which has mobilized $4.2 billion in public, private and non-profit funds. That is his role, where he served in that area. So he brings a lot of experience and a lot of drive, I dare say. He says that is Banga himself. He says he's a totally made in India guy. And of course, he has a good chance chance of winning the support of developing economies. I think that the pressure has not been as intense as this now on the major global banks to stop financing fossil fuel exploration and development and getting rid of malpass, I think sends a very tough signal that the days of bank CEOs who do not align strongly with the climate revolution are numbered.
Netflix yesterday said it was cutting prices in some countries. Will this work to stave off competitive threats?
Well, my sense is that the lowering of prices, especially in many of these countries which are emerging economies, will later be extended to Western markets as the cost of living pressures is forcing many to review their streaming subscriptions. Those that are cheap and bundled with other services like maybe Apple TV Plus, that is relatively cheap, and Amazon will be more compelling. And Disney's niche with family viewing is also a strong proposition, and of course is also more affordable. Netflix is the most expensive of most of these streaming offerings, and I believe they will find it increasingly difficult to differentiate with content creativity, despite a huge content investment. But we have to watch and see how the space evolves. Netflix has been aggressive in expanding overseas, but it hasn't been as successful as it wants to be. As you know, it's also in the midst of a controversial password sharing crackdown where it's restricting sharing to within a household. And others, of course, may also bring down their prices. Even as we speak, Netflix is much more expensive than Disney, Hulu, HBO, or even Paramount and Apple, just like I said. But we have to wait and see. Streaming surveys show that iPhone penetration levels have been dipping since 2020. So the question is, will lower prices help to improve market penetration? The answer, I think, is not necessarily.
And later today, we expect key U.S. inflation data that could move markets. What are you expecting?
The personal consumption expenditure index data for January is coming out today at 1:30. That's in the U.S. It's a less known indicator, despite it being the U.S. Fed's preferred inflation gauge. The difference this time is that many of the other preceding indicators like CPI and the factory gate inflation, PPI, suggested that high inflation is getting sticky. Now, the more relevant core PCE price index is expected to come out at 4.3% year on year, after printing 4.4% in December. The core monthly PC is expected to be up 0.4% after 1.3% in December. You recall that markets thought that CPI would ease at a faster pace, with most analysts anticipating an increase of only 6.2% year on year for CPI. We didn't get that. We got 6.4%. And that led, of course, to nervousness that the Fed will be reviewing its position. So let's see what comes out today. Obviously, if we get something that is on track in terms of expectations, that may not move markets much. But if you get an upside surprise, obviously markets are going to be even more nervous. So this index is going to be especially impactful. Already, the probability of 50 basis points by the Fed is slowly inching up. Remember, a month ago, nobody was talking of 50 basis points after this 25 basis points. 2 months ago, markets were actually thinking of easing in 2023. So the way the data is changing, the sentiment is really quite remarkable, and all eyes will be on this metric later today.
All right, business analyst Bode Oshosumi. Bode, thanks for taking us through the headlines. Appreciate your insights as always.